Welcome to the Engineering Success Podcast. Today, we're talking engineering leadership with Sebastiano. He's the Director of Engineering at Upwork and has also worked at Snapchat, PayPal, Pinterest, and Spotify. So without further ado, let's start the conversation and turn it over to our host and CEO of Dev Dynamics, Prue.
Thanks so much for taking the time to come on the Engineering Success Podcast. You've had some career like from Italy to Australia to now in US and in like pretty stellar companies like Snapchat and PayPal and now at Upwork. So super excited to get into all of it with you today.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, super excited as well to be here and chatting with you.
Awesome. So one of the things maybe that we wanted to jump into, and we see that we've heard from engineering leaders like yourself, that as you progress in your career, it becomes important to align with business teams or like being able to speak with business teams. And that can take like different forms, right? So how do you think about like maybe engineering leaders getting a seat at the table, getting a voice at the table, and being able to speak with their business teams, exec teams?
Yeah, I think to me, like the first thing is being curious about the business side and not just engineering. And that comes with using any opportunities that you have to ask questions, adding your comments. Typically, QBRs, MBRs, those forums is where there are exec, director of product, engineering, customer support, any function is there. So I think that's a good opportunity for you to ask questions and show interest. And I think after that, once you show curiosity, that's where like connections happen and you might set up meetings with any function and discuss more topics. But I think it's more about thinking about yourself, not just an engineering leader, but just as a leader in general, and being interested and curious in business metrics, in anything that you see that even you don't know, and start inquiring about things.
That's amazing to be able to think of yourself as a leader first and not just an engineering leader. That I think that's a great kind of mental model to have. Leading on from that, if you there are discussions that happen about, let's say, the KPIs or goals for engineering teams. Should they be engineering focused, or should they be in the sense that should engineering teams also start, and it's a debate that keeps going on, should engineering teams also have KPIs like CSAT scores, customer satisfaction scores, or revenue, or like features driving revenue? It's a bit complicated because there are product teams who are involved in the decision making. So engineering teams don't necessarily have full agency into what they pick to work. And so having the KPIs, and there's a bit of a conflict there. But is that something that you have seen, or is it that's happening more? I feel like the chatter about it is increasing now, maybe with the shifting macro conditions. Anything that you have seen or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think making a connection between what you do and impact on the business is becoming more and more relevant. And I think that's what I do with my teams. And you can use different frameworks. I'm mentioning OKRs as one, where you really connect what the team is doing with which metrics you're going to move on the business side. And this metric can be revenue, can be app adoption, can be a bunch of things. But I think making sure that there is a connection is key. So you don't really just make the connection with the initiative, which is a way to move a specific business metric, but directly with the business metric. I think that's really what it's really important.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. It's not just being connected to the initiative, but actually driving stuff like CSATs and revenue. Are you in any kind of anecdotes or any patterns you're seeing where is this happening more or less now?
I think it's happening more now just because at any level from leadership, there is discussion about productivity, which I think, if I think about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the conversation was more about growth, or maybe it was the companies I was at. Now I think the mindset is more about, okay, let's make sure that connection is there and is pretty straight, and each objective is linked to an overall objective, because leadership wants to have a clear path to productivity. Like, you want to understand clearly how people are utilized. So definitely, I would say that in the last couple of years, there is more of that.
No, absolutely. I think that more of a conversation around outcome rather than just output and the impact of engineering teams. So to make that happen, how do you go about building the teams? Or do you think about building teams differently, or like how team is spending the time differently, that we have to be more outcome focused now?
Yeah, first of all, the way I think about this is at the organizational level, like organizing my teams based on the business metrics and key initiatives that we have. For example, I can say in my current group, I have 4 different key initiatives, top line metrics to move. And that's where I aligned organizationally my org with those 4 different areas. So that's the first thing. Then second, having clear transparency on, again, OKRs and goals for the team, so that like people know exactly like what they're doing, how they impact like the key metric, and if that what they're doing that doesn't impact, or that initiative they're working on doesn't impact any metric, question, and like I say, why I'm working on this. So even having that critical thinking and around what they're doing. And then I think also like balancing the business side of things with the engineering quality. So like definitely setting goals as well around engineering quality. So having a set of metrics indicator on the engineering side that evaluate that, because it's important to have business goals, but as an engineering lead, you also have to plug in and making sure that what you're building is solid and is long-term.
Yeah, there would be some type of work that might not directly affect, or it might be harder to make the connection now, but if you don't focus on that, it will definitely impact some KPIs negatively in the future.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, it could be stuff like fixing technical debt or like whatever, and like you always have to make a case for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and that's where like, when I think how my org spend time, you want to allocate 20-30% of time just purely on those initiatives and more like purely tech oriented, and then 70-80% on product business side of things.
Makes sense. That's a pretty good split right there. Moving on to a slightly different, like we were talking about teams and organizing teams. Like you are currently, I believe, in a remote setup. So in that, like, how are you going about making sure that you're managing effectively in a remote setup? Like, what data, signals, tools, rituals, maybe that you guys are using to, manage effectively remotely?
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of things to be said there, because when you work on a remote setting, specifically in the way that we manage at Upwork, where I work right now, we work with people from all around the world. I think, first of all, there are principles and rules that you need to set. You need to be clear, transparent on the way you communicate, the time zone, when people is working synchronously and asynchronously. So also clarifying that difference, making sure to clarify when synchronous meetings are required and when not, and when you can work asynchronously. I think the synchronous meetings are still very much needed when there is a high sense of urgency, for example. It is often more efficient. And that's one of the guideline that we set in my org. I think the other part is being transparent and over communicate on the things that you're doing and on the blockers, specifically on the blockers, and how people can help. In terms of other things that we do is pulse surveys on the team and making sure we gather feedback on the things that are not working. They're usually anonymous. we try different tools. Right now we do just anonymous Google Forms, pretty basic, but that works. And then, as I said before, there are a bunch of quantitative metrics that we also use to see how the team is performing, and such as we look at deployment frequency, like all the DORA metrics for the team, and purely engineering metrics. And of course, the bi-weekly OKR reviews helps a lot to make sure that we stay on track on things and we adopt any risk mitigation on projects as well.
No, that's pretty comprehensive. And I think you mentioned sometimes synchronous meetings are required for certain tasks. So if it's global, like how do you achieve that? Or have you arranged teams where in certain cities which are around the same area, so they can then meet if some brainstorming is needed? Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, each team operates, they decide their own ceremonies.
Sure.
But when there is for the case you described, so there is a 3-4 hours overlap for all the time zone where people are required to work synchronously.
Right.
So, and that's typically from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific time. Aside from those 3 hours, then the team can work basically any time they want, like according to their time zone and also preference.
Sure. Yeah.
But definitely those 3 hours, that's where if you have issues, those are like the 3 hours that we have planning meetings, issues, discussions, so that people are unblocked. Yeah.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Also, I think in my mind, when you said synchronous, I immediately jumped to maybe in person. But of course, it doesn't need to be in person.
Synchronous.
And of course, sync is, it can be on Zoom as well. I think we are in office, recently moved on office, so my mind is there. But yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned is OKR reviews that you seem to do like very religiously and like bi-weekly reviews. And is that the one tool that you're using to drive? One of the things that we have become interested in recently is how do you drive behavioral change, right, at individual level and at an org level, right? If our bi-weekly reviews are your tools for making sure everyone is aligned, and beyond that, at the manager, at the team level, at the individual level, sometimes they'll be like, hey, we need to follow these best practices or do this or something like that. Are there other things that you are using to, would just love to maybe even talk about it, about behavioral change. And I'm pretty sure you probably have thought about it. Driving behavioral change in teams and across orgs, is that something that you think about or have like probably try to make happen?
Yeah, that definitely. I think on the behavioral side, there are a few things that we do to incentivize certain behavior, like continuous learning, continuous improvement, continuous innovation. And for example, we have tech talks like Lunch and Learn, where people share things. Those are things that we incentivize. I have a whole hands every month where is heavily skewed on demos across all the org. So there is a cross-pollination about what's happening. And in terms of, so you mentioned OKR review. OKR reviews is actually more for the leadership, manager or staff. But in terms of behavior, yes, that's more an alignment tool, but also a way for raising urgency if there is need to be raised, or if there are risk, and is a forcing function for us to make sure that things are on track and we act accordingly. But yeah, definitely for the team, I think having some of those meetings, as I described, they really develop transparency, knowledge sharing, which are all things, values that I'm really a big fan of in a team, and develop also curiosity, passion, so that people can invest time in learning more.
Yeah. No, it's the knowledge sharing part, right? Like these demos and Lunch and Learn and tech talks. I think they are like informal tools for knowledge dissemination, which you might not immediately be able to link to a certain thing. But overall, I think over time, I think people will passively pick up a lot of things, maybe even behaviors that other teams are doing, or certain ways something is architected, which then leads to just makes it more efficient. I think things that there's so much knowledge within an org, but it's a hard problem to solve. How do you make sure that at the right time? Yeah.
And also like sharing, another thing important is sharing like postmortems across the team, because I think it's important to also share the failures and like having and learning from those failures. And sometimes a failure happening on a team and the learning there are important for another team. And also, as you mentioned before, the architectural decision. So there is an architectural forum as well, where there are more discussion about architecture. And those are like also very important to share. And also another forum that we have that I wanted to call out is tech circles among each technology. So we have, since my teams are, they're made of iOS, Android, web, QA, and backend engineers, there are tech circles per technology. And those are like very key, like just to think, so people like they just talk about technology, how to move things forward.
Amazing. It's almost small meetups or communities within
Exactly.
the org.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very nice.
That's right.
This postmortem, I was working on a like incident management tool before this. We had a small product there, and postmortems, right? And there are certain companies like Cloudflare which are pretty well known for doing like public postmortems, and like people look into it. And in the orgs that I've worked in, engineering teams, and some engineering teams put a lot of effort into writing out these postmortems. What's been your like, how much is that consumed? And because it's for me, that's again another area of that's I'm very curious about, and especially with GenAI and everything, because GenAI is very good with language. I'm very curious about as to how maybe that can be used for, because when you're writing the postmortem, your goal really is that the essence of the postmortem somehow reaches all the audience and is with them and affects some behavioral change at some point. So how do you think about that? Yeah, because I saw your facial expression change. Is maybe something you have thought about. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just smiling because that's something I was really talking about it yesterday with one of my team member, because we had an incident, and typically we have a template for across the company that we use for incidents.
Right.
We have an SRA team that manage that, but this team member was asking me, should I use that template? And my answer was, let's keep it simple. The things I really want to know are the root causes, the impact, and the remediation items. Those are like the three things that it really matters to me in a postmortem. So like the template is full of like lots of details, and I was just saying let's just focus on those three things, because I wanted to have the postmortem just internal. I think what you said in terms of building the artifact and using Gen AI, totally. I think to me, if an engineer spends 5 minutes in just putting a bullet points and asks a prompt to generate the doc, and the doc just is more elaborated, that's perfect. Because again, the information I want to know are like those three things.
No, that's something I've been thinking about, and maybe we'll get a chance to speak on another forum, about it, to share some ideas there. Awesome. One thing about managing teams, and maybe there could be a flavor of doing this differently when you're in a remote setup. So how do you think about balancing team performance versus team health? Because we also hear from engineering leaders now, is the expectations are slightly changing, as you said, in multiple different ways. There's a lot of talk about end of ZERP era and how that affects engineering teams, and hiring seems to have been slowed down definitely in a lot of companies. But yeah, I think maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't in your context. But yeah, just talking about balancing team performance with health, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a very important topic, very relevant on a remote setting. Well, what we do, something I mentioned before is a pulse survey, like those monthly
Pulse
surveys.
Sure.
But that's a starting point. I think the one key thing is like setting goals related to team health. So if I look at my quarterly OKRs for my org, I have product, business objective, engineering objective, but I also keep all the time one org health objective with 2 or 3 KRs, which they might reconnect to some of the things that we asked during the previous pulse survey. And typically they should be aligned with the values that you set, the principle and values that you set in your organization. So for example, I don't know, if in one of your poll, before we mentioned about Gen AI, and people like surface, and that's actually real what happened. Like the surface, okay, people are very interested in learning about AI and like Gen AI. Then one of my org health KR can be, okay, achieve 80% of people in my org to use, or another one could be have 5% of time for people allocated in learning Gen AI tooling in this quarter. So like just an example of you want to set probably goals at the org health level as well. So that then you basically keep track of things that are not just product and engineering.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned Gen AI, and could be a good segue for us to, because it's on everyone's mind. And there's a lot of talk about devins and these AI coders and AI co-workers and software developers, etc. But how do you think engineering leadership and management as a practice, right, changes or is affected by Gen AI?
Yeah, definitely things are evolving pretty quickly. The way I think for me is that I just see it as a way to increase productivity overall. So I think if you look at the roadmap that we have all the time, like any company I've been, we have to always draw a line and we work on maybe the top 30% item among the list of items that we have. So the way I see it is through Gen AI, we can actually work on 4x the things that we work in a year with having AI helping the people that we have, and maybe we can even add more people to exponentially increase the productivity. So I think the approach that people sometimes take is, oh, let's shortcut and take less to work on the things that we can do it. But I think the way to see it is that instead is let's do much more, and actually we might need even more people to do much more. It's just like the boundaries of what we can achieve is almost, I'm not saying unlimited, but it's going to be a lot more. For example, like now we do have migration projects typically last a year or a year and a half. I think in 5-10 years, you might do migration projects in weeks. You might even try in different technologies like the spikes in few weeks. And even the satisfaction of people will be much more. That's the way I see it.
That's amazing, because there's this thought experiment I was thinking about, and then I was thinking about it, and then someone tweeted about it as well, because I was thinking, let's say with Gen AI, you said 4x. Let's say we do 8x in 2 years, right? 8x the amount of work is going out. How much, let's say you're a product company, right? So how much capacity is there? How big is the roadmap? How much coding can you actually do? And because the end result in a product company is features, right? If it's complexity of features, that's fine. But will that lead to like how many features? It's more like a thought experiment. How many features can a user handle? And in some products, there could be endless categories. And so they could be, that's how that goes on, or like features become more complex. And I think then there was also a tweet about it, like how much software can the world handle, or how much software can be done. So do you think about that? Let's say, and I think one of the things you brought about is super interesting, which is that migrations, like you have to do it. But now what it could enable is that, hey, is there a new stack? You are working on a newer, cooler, better kind of tech every year or every 6 months, and everyone is happy. And it's also, there is that thing of like, it's a new thing, like devs love working on, engineers love working on new things. So maybe that is one way you can, hey, we are on a new stack every 6 months, we are on the best of the best every 6 months, and software can do that, unlike a lot of other industries. But yeah, just spitballing here, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think on the first thing you said about the product and how much the world can really put up with software, one thing to think, especially in product engineering, is that lots of things that we do are experiments. So not all the features that we build, they are effectively rolled out to 100% of people. Even if you look at any app like Meta, sometimes you see some features, but then they don't get rolled out. So you can think of a huge amount of experiments that might run. And so not everything is going to be a feature delivered. Also, you might also think about different products within a company being shipped. So like now, Meta has Threads, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, right? And typically each company has got one product, not typically, but for the most. But you can think of that becoming like each company having like different products as well.
Multi-product sooner. Yeah.
Yeah. And multiple experiments within each product. So I think it's just the bound, like sometimes we have our boundaries because that's how we're used to operate. But if you think about if we just don't put boundaries to the speed of development, you can build so much stuff. And it's not like you require less people. You require the same or more. It's just that
So many interesting thoughts here, because one of the discussions, I've been a product manager for some time, and one of the points of friction between engineering teams and product managers sometimes can be, and this is something I was discussing with someone recently, is that, oh, something will be built and the PM or the business will really want this feature, like this is that we want this, and they build it, and then either no one adopts it or it somehow it changes. And that seems to be a point of friction between engineering teams and product teams, is that, oh, we built all this code and no one is using it. And sometimes I want to say is that, hey, there is no perfect information. If PMs or even business teams, no matter how much amount of information they have, they don't have a crystal ball as to how the market will react. But if we reframe it as experiment, and that more companies can now do more experiments. And I think there's some companies, I think Meta and like the original, I think Booking.com used to be super famous for doing tons of experiments all the time, right? Like they are the original like company which really pushed the boundaries on A/B testing and like doing a lot of stuff. Now every company can become like a Meta or Booking.com, and the cost of experiments is lesser. So that's another way of looking at it, as to, it's not, oh, it's every software is a bloat and there are like 30 features when your users can barely understand four workflows in your team. But yeah, those are, I think, amazing 2-3 ways you have given me to think about this. Yeah, migrations and multiple experiments. But yeah, you're saying something.
Even the data analysis, I feel like lots of companies, they also struggle in building instrumentation around data analysis and cutting the data in a certain way. And I think being able to expedite building all the infrastructure there, and that will be connected to experimentation where like things become just really fast and efficient to build and to evaluate.
Amazing. It's super excited to see where that kind of takes us.
Yeah.
I think one of the probably last kind of things I wanted to go over with you is when we talk with engineering leaders, I mean, they might frequently mention there's a surprising dearth of material on how to navigate like an engineering hierarchy, right? Engineering leadership hierarchy. And so we've been thinking about that. How can we create like a corpus of material around it? To that effect, wanted to ask you about some lessons you learned or about your own kind of transition. So last major engineering leadership transition that you had, what did you wish you knew, or what kind of surprised you about the skills needed in the new role?
Yeah, I think a few things to be said. Like generally speaking, when you look at career progression, yes, there are like each company will have a matrix of expectations, a framework. I think generally in the industry, you can also see that there are similar patterns across companies. To me, it's very important to observe people at the next level, which can be your manager, it can be other people, and observe what they do, how they operate, and learn from it. I think that's really helpful, like in thinking about the next level. To your other question about something that I wish I knew before I moved into it, like a director of engineering role, for example, I think it's just more the thinking. Like when you become a director of engineering, it's more the strategical thinking that really matter. Like it's less of let's make sure that the project is on track. That's important, but that's more something you delegate to your senior engineer manager or engineer managers. It's more important about having a vision about the future of the org. So I think to me that's something like definitely now I'm uncomfortable. It's same as when you transition from an IC to a manager, that there is a period of time where you still think as your previous role. I think same for me, like when I moved into a director of engineering. So I think, yeah, maybe something I wish I could have focused right away. But I think those are all things that you adjust and you learn.
Awesome. I think having that strategic vision, it's almost like, as you see, going at the director level, right? Having for the future of the org, that's something that we have heard as well. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast, and we hope to have you again here soon. Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun for me, and a couple of questions that we got to dig into. Super excited to maybe go over it again sometime with you.
Yeah, no, anytime.
Thank you so much, Sebastiano, again, and have a nice day.
That's all for today on the Engineering Success Podcast. Thank you so much for being with us. Stay tuned for more.